Well, good evening. Just going to do another trade breakdown for my trade on GJ this morning. And this trade I took approximately about quarter to eight, leading into London Open, and I'll kind of talk about why that was a factor with my buy today. But I am on the replay tool. I'm on the 4 hour time frame, and I have brought it back to just before my session starts. So this is the 10 to 2 a.m. 4 hour candle, and this is the 2 to 6. So I'm going to be trading within the next candle. Okay, so because these two candles are bullish, my bias is then buys. I'm looking for buys. Okay, so before I even kind of drop down and get into the next candle, solely just based on this time frame alone, what does this chart tell me? Well, I have marked up the most recent supports and resistance to the left just because it's most recent and because these candles reacted at these levels. Okay, so the first thing that stands out to me is this candle. Yes, it closed bullish, but it rejected this support. This candle closed bullish but closed above the support, which is a good sign, and it also broke the high of the previous, but it did reject this support. Okay, now if this candle had have closed bullish but closed below this support, and both of these candles had have rejected this level, I would have then been cautious of buying into that level. Maybe that would have been my target, but because we're above that, that's a good sign for me. So when I'm thinking about buys, I want to remain or be buying above this support, because if we start to pull back and form a support down here within the next candle, there is a chance that if price is moving back up, that this level can act as a resistance and we can maybe push down from here. So being above that is the first thing. Being above the support is what I like to see. It kind of gives me a good confirmation that if we can remain above this level, then there's a good chance of continued upside, potentially to fill this wick. And for targets, I'm thinking, well, you could look to fill this wick. You could also look at this resistance left. You also have this resistance left, which is a few pips above, 10 pips. And then you also have this sort of candle wick here. I'm thinking as price is pushing down and we're coming back above, if we can remain above these levels, we can push to the upside. So these are all just based off this time frame alone. That's what I'm looking at for potential areas of interest, where I would like to be above, targets, areas that might pose a problem, and things like that, just off that time frame. So excuse me, so before I kind of break down the next candle or fast forward to today's candle during London session and see how that closed, this is basically, this candle here, this represents what my session candle was looking like at the time of me entering the trade. Okay, and I kind of want to talk about this because I solely base my entry off this candle alone and off this 4 hour time frame alone. I did have a look at the lower time frames, but I took my entry based off this, and I want to kind of talk about why and what made me, come to that decision to base my entry based off that time frame. So when I took my entry, which was just roughly around here, which will bring on the long position and kind of talk about in a second, but at this time, what I was looking at here was, well, this candle is trading above the support. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, I would like to be above that level. Okay, when I'm buying, this candle had pushed down, right, and formed its lower wick, right, and it pushed back up, and now we're trading above this. So what really interested me was basically how this candle was forming in this wick creation, because if we drop down to the 30-minute time frame and the 15-minute time frame, and if I just kind of skip through a couple of candles here, I'll show you. So we're at 6 o'clock, that's 6:15, 6:30, 6:45, 7 o'clock. And we can kind of see here, if I just bring on, this is my most recent support and resistance based off of the 30-minute time frame, as you can see. So what we're doing is prices basically pushed up from the resistance, support, resistance, support, and now this level in here is sort of acting as a sort of mid-range support. Okay, so if I skip through one more candle, we can see that's a 30-minute candle. If I just go back and if I just go to the 50-minute time frame, we can see that that's how that lower wick was formed on that 4 hour. Okay, right here. So the fact that we had formed a support, we had pushed up, formed the lower resistance, pushed down, sort of like a nice close here, bearish close, and then this candle pushed down, but it actually failed to sustain below the 4 hour support. It closed back above, and we can see this is a sort of support now turned resistance, or sorry, resistance now turned support, and this level is holding. And then this candle printed, right? Now this is how, this is basically how the 4 hour was looking at the time. Now that's how the 4 hour candle closed. So when London opened, we had a push, or we had a push pre-London and then opened with London as well. But if we kind of just disregard that candle, that's how we were looking at the moment at that time. So what I was thinking of was, well, what was the reason for the entry was solely based on the fact that if we are pushing up in the market, right, we have then pushed down, failed to sustain below the support, push back up, and now we're trading above the previous close of the 4 hour. As well as that, we're now leading into the last 15 minutes of the hourly candle, which leads into London Open. And typically what we see within the last 15 minutes is sometimes we get a push, and then when London opens, we have the volume that comes in, and then that kicks price on. So that was sort of my thinking. Now, at the time of me buying this, I wasn't solely aware of how the 15-minute formed its support. I just knew that that candle, which was in here, pushed down, rejected, and then this candle had sort of confirmed that support. Because if you were looking at this from a 15-minute time frame, essentially what you could have done was, well, you could say, well, do you know what, this candle failed to push down, we formed a support, closing above the 4 hour support. This next candle has then broken half of the previous, respected the low, it's confirmed the support by closing bullish. You could have went, I'll take an entry there, stops below the support, and I'll target Asian high, okay, because that's the most recent resistance, right? And that's essentially how you could have looked at that from a 15-minute time frame, a 15-minute perspective. But because I was entering that trade on the 4 hour, I'll bring on my long position here, and it was kind of the exact same, only my targets were slightly different. But where I get out of the trade was basically where the 15-minute hit the resistance on the 30-minute time frame and completed that triangle. So this is where I entered, and as soon as I entered the trade, if we go to the 15-minute, we can kind of see that we then got the push with the last 15 minutes of the hour. So with this, when I looked at my targets here, what I was sort of anticipating was, well, do you know what, if I can get into a position before London Open, and if we get a push up and say price is somewhere above my entry, whether it's here, here, or here, if I'm in a good position and then the volume kicks in and we carry on in that direction, that's going to make for a nice trade. So that was my thought process. Now, what I actually get out of the trade was I actually managed the position and closed out at Asian high, roughly around there. And the reason for doing so I actually get out before London Open actually come in. And the reason for this, because I was watching it on the 15-minute time frame, price had pushed up, and we started to pull back from here. And it says, you know what, this is the most recent resistance. I'm happy with where price is, with the profit I've got, and how far we've moved. And if I sort of reflect back on my trades where I typically close mine out at 0.5% because of my win rate with that percentage, I'm actually greater than that at the moment. So I closed the position. What happened was with London, we sort of pulled down on the open, and then we shot to the upside, and then we carried on for a bit before we rolled over to the downside. But if we look at this from a 4-hour perspective, we can kind of see how all the targets were hit. In a sense, we hit this resistance, and we did come up to complete this, which was my original thought process leading into the trade. Now you might say, well, what about this? This is the most recent support, and between your entry and that area, it's 7 pips. Okay, 7 pips for me is enough to see how price reacts at that level. And if we look at the last 15 minutes leading into the open, knowing that usually gives you a nice push, or can do sometimes, not all the time, but it can do. We're trading in line with our session pass. We're respecting this 4-hour support. We've already created the lower wick. We failed to close below. We couldn't sustain below. We then formed a support, and now we're moving in the direction of the bass, my session bass. And this 15-minute candle closed here. So I'm literally in this position right here before London even happens, London even opens. So I'm already trading above that. So, you know, you could even say, well, as a security, if price starts to pull back deep enough, you can just get out of the trade. But I would be expecting, because it's kind of like this support, because we closed above that and we pull down, this pen's going all fucking weird, but I'll just use this. Let me see. Let me just bring this on here. What I'm just expecting is, well, if we're above this support, we close above. If we pull back in and we fail to remain below and we come back above, then I would be expecting this level to hold on the way back down. Similar to this level, if we're above it and we start to pull back down, I want to be seeing this level holding before we continue the upside, if it even needs to come back like that. But that is sort of my trade breakdown and the sort of reasoning behind why I get into the trade. And it just happened to be that is how the candle closed on the 15. I literally entered at 7:44. This candle closed at 7:45. So it was, the entry aligned with the sort of lower time frames in a sense and what they were doing. But the main reason behind the trade was this 4-hour support. It was key for me to be above it for entering buys, and the fact that we had this big rejection here and we failed to be below that level. We then formed a support above and we entered, and there is enough pips there to that support from my entry for me to see what happens. If we start to react and come back, then I might look to maybe get out of the trade before volume. It was all sort of tied in with the likes of the volume sort of giving the push or the potential push and anticipating that, along with the direction that we're going in the market. So that's my breakdown for today's trade. So I'll kind of come out of that one with plus 0.7, which is good. So I'll get this uploaded. Cheers.